Our next speaker is coming from Ceres, a huge, fantastic force in what we're talking about. She's going to be talking about the $1 trillion investment campaign financing Drawdown. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm presenting Mindy Lubber, the CEO and president of Ceres. Thank you.
All right, folks. I know you've all been sitting for a long time, and if anybody wants to stand up for a minute, go for it. Stretch, all good. I'm going to see if I can figure out how to work this technology, which I almost always screw up, but there we go. So can we go backwards? Then we'll leave it right there. Great. We all need to stretch, but a great day, and I probably shouldn't walk around. I'm not mic'd, so I'll stay at the podium. I want to build on what my colleague just talked about, but build on it from an organizing perspective, not necessarily from a technical, analytical, research perspective. and that is, what are the ways to organize to get to what we need to get to? If we look at the Paris Agreement as it relates to climate change as the North Star, and I'll come back to the slide in a second, but if we look at it as the North Star, that means a significantly under a 2-degree world, and that's a bunch of scientists resolve that. But let me translate that. That means a non-fossil fuel future. That means we're rid of fossil fuels. That is an inordinate leap. It's almost beyond, it boggles the mind, but it ought not boggle the mind. We need a plan that both limits the risk, moves coal out, moves fossil fuels out, moves renewables in, and we think about the smartest and best ways to do it. Let me say one other thing. I'm going to talk a lot about capital markets, and I'll define it. Moving companies, moving investors, and it is true. I spend almost 100% of my time trying to change people like Levi's or Bank of America, Citi, not because my organizing roots aren't around a more grassroots perspective, but after 40 years as an advocate, spending time organizing campaigns, getting arrested at nuclear power plants, running presidential campaigns, because I always think you've got to get into politics. I then spent years in the Clinton administration as a regulator, as the EPA regional administrator, writing regulations, enforcing regulations. But when I came out and thought about it, I said, okay, I've got another 10, 15 years in me, or 20 years of organizing. Do I organize grassroots? And let me say the following. I don't think one constituency group is more important than the other. I think we need to be organizing every constituency group and using every tactic and strategy. I've spent a lot of years as a litigator, suing. Sometimes it took me 4 years to sue one company, or 3 years to negotiate an agreement with General Electric around PCBs in the Housatonic to get to a $450 million agreement. I think all of those tactics and strategies, litigation, organizing, lobbying, are all crucial to where we have to go to build a sustainable future for our families, for my kids, your kids, and our economy. But what I decided coming out of the EPA was that I was going to try and move and organize the world's biggest financial players. Not because they're true blue, not because they wake up in the morning thinking about how to build a movement, but they have enormous resources, they have enormous clout, they have the ability to either worsen the problem by orders of magnitude or fix the problem. I think we have come a long way. I think there's lots of room for optimism, but I am not living in Never Never Land. I do not think JP Morgan and Morgan Stanley and everybody else that we're talking about have radically changed their ways. But they're starting to. The debate that I had 10 years ago when I was in boardrooms, or when I was dealing with trustees of the largest investment firms, making the case that sustainability, that climate change, water shortages are capital markets issue. They're costing us hundreds of billions of dollars a year. And that not acting on them was going to do in the economy as well as the small thing do in my kids and our families, where there's nothing more important. But I will say that the larger companies and investors are no longer saying, why are you here in my boardroom? Why are you pushing us to integrate sustainability in everything we do? Why do you want to see metrics, goals, what we're doing, how we're doing it, and having them made public? They get that. They're still moving way too slow, but we are seeing progress. I will give a little anecdote and then move forward. Larry Fink, and he runs BlackRock, $6.5 trillion in assets under management, bigger than many countries, right? He has now said, now again, the products for his investors, there's probably 5 socially responsible ones out of 10,000, I don't know the exact number, but he's starting to get it. He said in a letter to shareholders last month, the role of the corporation is bigger than just profits, and we need to be looking beyond that edge. And last week, and again, I understand how crazy it sounds quoting Jamie Dimon from JP Morgan and Warren Buffett, because they have been part of the problem and will continue to be in many ways. But when they said last week, let's get rid of quarterly earnings calls, where every company in the world is trying to show how great they are and how much money they are and prove that they're really doing well over 3 months. Well, 3 months means nothing. It does mean that nobody's going to invest in sustainability, where the payback for renewable energy, for energy efficiency, for water shortage equipment, for human rights policies, where those investments will take longer than 3 months to show up. So the light bulb was starting to go off, and that is the point I want to make. Is it there? No. Do we have an enormous amount of work to do? Without question. So what we try and do is work to do 3 things. Change the world's largest companies from the boardroom to the supply chain, change what they're doing on energy, on water, on renewables, on human rights, and seek very specific goals. You know, when 150 companies are now saying, we are going to drive our entire work by 100% renewables, we now know it could be done. When we have 400 companies that are now saying, we will build our goals around science-based targets, what the science tells us around reducing their carbon emissions, reducing their water use. That's a good thing. And every company that we're working with is starting to do something. Again, not enough, but our ask of them is several. One is that their board sets goals on sustainability. It's not delegated to a small committee off to the side. 2 is that compensation of a CEO is tied to those metrics. 3 is that there are clear, transparent goals on sustainability. 4 is that they drive that through to their supply chain. Hundreds of suppliers work with them, change all of those suppliers. And 5, which I would argue may be amongst the most important, is be consistent on policy. If you say you're a leader on climate, do not support the Chamber of Commerce killing every climate rule. If you say you're a leader on CAFE standards, as we got Ford and GM to do and stand with us when President Obama signed CAFE standards, then do not support President Trump wanting to roll that back entirely. It is not acceptable. It is not okay. Consistency matters. So we spend a good deal of time trying to change companies like these. The next is the power of investments. If you look at the asset owners, so asset managers manage a lot of money, asset owners, the large sovereign wealth funds, pension funds, we're working with 170 investors to use their clout. They own every company in the market. So tell those companies in the market, in their portfolios, they want to see more stringent standards on reducing carbon footprint, on getting us to that clean trillion, investing $1 trillion a year in clean energy, and on changing their practices. So not only are we trying to change companies, but trying to change investors so they'll do 3 or 4 things. One is get closer to a 5% investment in clean energy and clean transportation. Right now we're at about 1.5%. We need to get to $1 trillion a year to build a clean energy economy. Bloomberg New Energy told us we are at $360 billion, so we need to triple that almost. We still have a long way to go. Working with the world's largest investors, we're trying to get them to put more money in renewable energy, clean technology, 2, use their clout with companies they're invested in to change their practices, and 3, they too need to support public policy. They cannot any longer say these aren't real capital market issues. And I will tell you, when we brought hundreds of companies and investors to Paris around the climate negotiations, it was the capital market leaders' voices that stood out and were heard. And then finally, there's Paris. Finally, we're trying to move capital market systems. We need rating agencies, and we're making progress to rate things differently, negatively, if companies or bonds are not factoring in sustainability, and to do it differently if they are. That's important. So what are we seeing out there? The economics are so very real, and I have Aspen out here, probably one of the most beautiful places in the world that we could be convening in, because Aspen, like every insurance company, where there was $300 billion in costs from the hurricanes last fall, or there was $85 billion in California from the costs of drought. But think about Aspen. Think about what it means if the temperatures continue to rise at the rate they're projected to over the next 50 years. Ski resorts across the country will see a reduction in the length of their ski season by 80%. There's a reason the ski industry is joining us and is up in arms with business and investors across the country, saying, stop putting this into the bucket of some environmental cause. We can't run our lives, we can't run our business, we can't see this Aspen that we all know and love that's so extraordinary if we don't do it. It's not only a moral and human imperative, it's an economic imperative. So what do we need to do? We need to change the largest capital market players. What are your roles in do it and how we do it? When I read about Hawkins' Project Drawdown, he talks about the capacity to create a remarkably different economy, one that can restore ecosystems and protect the environment while bringing forth innovation, prosperity, meaningful work, and true security. We are trying to make the case that if you're Coke and Pepsi, even if your mission is to make money, and some of us have different day-to-day missions, they're not going to be able to do it much longer, if in fact we don't radically change the way we use water. They went into India, Coke, I believe, was literally denied their license to operate, lost $600 million because they tried to site plants where there's not enough water. Well, you know what? There's not enough water, period, now everywhere. India is facing a crisis of unknown proportion. Cape Town in South Africa is facing a time in the very near future where there will be no water. So building sustainability in every way into what companies do, what investors do, and how we calculate the wealth of our world and the wealth of our country is key. And investors are coming together. Let me give you one or two examples and then move us maybe to a few questions. One is we just organized, amongst other things, We Are Still In. I'll give you two examples. One is when President Trump said he was going to pull out of Paris, we first asked 30 CEOs of the world's largest companies to put an ad in the Wall Street Journal and Washington Post urging the president not to pull out. Well, we saw what he did, and it boggles the mind, but so does everything else he's doing. So I'm not sure what to say about that. I'll stay out of politics. But the day after he pulled out, and remember, folks, he can't really pull out for another almost 3 years. So I'm not convinced that we're not going to get to the goals that we had with Paris, with or without the president. We are moving forward. When we saw him pull out, we launched We Are Still In. We have 2,800 investors, companies, healthcare institutions, labor unions, academic institutions who have announced we are still in. We're going to keep moving, we're going to set goals, we're going to make progress, and we're going to find a way to honor where the United States should be, rather than where our president is trying to make us, where we've been pulled out of one of the most successful agreements, where even Syria and Nicaragua are still in. What he could be thinking is beyond me. But our job collectively is to make sure the institutions we're part of, our churches, our academic universities, who we shop from, are saying we are still in, and each one of us has a role. But I'll tell you, the number grows every day. It's heartening, and we're going to keep building it. Or the Climate Action 100, which Anthony just mentioned. We have 300 investors whose assets total $30 trillion, about a third of the worldwide economy, who have said acting on climate now is an imperative, and we're going to make that happen. And what the investors are doing is they have targeted the 100 largest greenhouse gas emitters, And they have said to those emitters, we own you, you're in our portfolios. We want to see you reduce your footprint, invest in renewables, green bonds, renewable energy, support public policy, and be transparent about what you're doing. And we're already seeing large utilities and others saying, we're in, we'll do it. The power of money is real. It doesn't matter if we all wake up thinking about how to make more money or building our own 55,000 square foot homes, which somebody talked about, which of course is absurd. But we've got to organize capital. So let me close by saying, what do we have to do? Because as much enthusiasm, or at least forward movement I'm seeing, and there is forward movement and it's real, it's a fraction of where we need to go. We are not getting to that $1 trillion a year or that well below 2 degrees without major change. The piece we're doing is organizing the largest investors in companies. But companies care desperately about 3 things: about their investors, and that's why their investors are telling them what to do. They care desperately about their employees, and I will tell you, employees want to work for companies that are sustainability leaders, and they care desperately about each and every one of us as consumers. If a company's getting poor ratings on sustainability, think about where you shop, what you do, how you speak. But make your voice heard. 500 people saying to Best Buy, and I'm not saying they're a bad company, we're not going to shop from you because of your practices. That makes them thinking. When you have Walmart, not the most progressive company in the world, radically changing their environmental practices, we're making progress. So I want to urge every one of you, think about where you invest your money, as Willie Tash and others have said. Think about where you shop and what you do. Make your voice heard on public policy. I know it feels hopeless as it relates to Washington, but we're making progress at the state level, and the power of what we could do at a local level sometimes is all the more powerful. So we're going to get there. We've got no choice, but we need everybody in this room acting, writing, thinking. I'll look forward to working with each and every one of you. Thank you.